eyebrow piercings, pros, cons, advantages, disadvantages. Going to give you 5 of each, along with what you should know beforehand, the piercing experience, jewelry, healing, living with the piercing, and what happens if you decide you don't like it anymore and decide to take it out. Coming up next on Pros and Cons by Piercer, Season 2, Episode number 15, so you might want to stick around. For those who are new to the channel, first off, welcome. And if you haven't watched any other videos, you haven't heard this already, you may not know who I am. My name is DaVo. I'm a professional body piercer and have been since 1994. I own and operate the Axiom Body Piercing Studio, located here in Des Moines, Iowa, inside Skin Kitchen Tattoo. So when I talk to you about these things, I'm talking to you a level of expertise that comes from being in the body piercing industry for well over 26 years. So what's the piercing we're going to talk about today? It's eyebrow piercings. Kind of one of those piercings that just seems to like float out of fashion and then completely dies off and then comes back. It's done this at least twice in my career. Eyebrow piercing is located on the brow, through the brow, kind of that meaty part, usually done at an angle to match the curvature of the eyebrow and at the corner of the eye traditionally. They can move inward. We usually try to avoid that dead center area because there's a lot of nerve endings there and it could not feel good and have other problems. But normally it's to the outside part of the eyebrow. As far as the history of this piercing, it's kind of credited with the punk rock subculture. There were people doing this back in the 70s. Now, were those permanent piercings? Not really. Usually it was a situation where they stuffed a safety pin through there for shock value. Also, slowly common to do the lip, the cheek, the nose, all kinds of other things. They weren't really designed. I can't see anybody wearing them. I've never met anybody who went, yeah, I pierced my eyebrow in 77 and I still have it. No, that doesn't happen. And just a word of advice, never, ever pierce anything with a safety pin. They're not going to do well inside the body. Usually that finish wears off almost immediately, and then whatever's in that undercoating and what's underneath there, that nickel finish, it's going to leak right into your system and cause problems. So never pierce with safety pins or wear them in healed jewelry or healed piercings. Now, we move into the modern age of body piercing, and it slowly has developed, I believe, in the late 80s, early 90s. By the time I came along in 94, it was a very established piercing. It was something that was done quite often. It became very popular during the rise of the alternative music thing, punk rock in the 90s, when you all discovered it. Kind of the Lollapalooza Warped Tour thing. That's where it came about. So, with that out of the way, let's talk about the pros, the advantages, the things that we like about this piercing, the things that make you go, hey, this would be a good idea to get this done. First one being is it tends to be a fairly easy heal. It's not a really complicated one. Really, the only problem that I have ever encountered is if you're wearing things against it. Maybe if you work as a welder or in a rock band that wears masks every day, you might have some issues. Other than that, this is a fairly easy heal, usually lasting anywhere from right in that 8 to 12 week period up to about 16 weeks. Number 2, draws attention to the eye. It's one of those piercings you can have that's going to draw attention to your eyes, which I think is one of the most fascinating parts of the human face. The mirror to the soul, they say. But having this piercing up there kind of draws attention to that. Can kind of enhance the area and make it more noticeable. Number 3, with this one, depending on the jewelry you wear in it, it can be very subtle, very elegant, or it can be very, very extreme. You can really put some stuff in there that says, yeah, I'm a piercing. Yes, I'm an eyebrow piercing, and you better damn well know it. Or you can put something in there that's just kind of accents the area. Just a simple barbell with 2 balls on it. So, or curved barbell, I should say. It gives you a lot of options when it comes to that. And the fourth one is it fits well into the anatomy. If done correctly, this will match the anatomy. It seems to be one of those piercings that just kind of fits in there. Like I said, depending on the jewelry, you can make it look like it's something foreign. But for the most part, if it's done correctly, the jewelry is somewhat subtle, and you and you heal it correctly, it's going to fit well right there. It's not really going to distract from it, so to speak. Number 5, the last one. This one doesn't affect sleeping as much as other piercings do. Most people don't sleep directly on their face, so they usually sleep on one side or the other. It's not going to get affected even as much as maybe a nostril piercing is, and definitely not as much as a ear would be. Now, with the pros out of the way, if you liked the video, give me a thumbs up. Let me know that you liked it, because we like it when you like them. It makes us feel better. Makes us feel warm, fuzzy, and just full of good cheer. The other thing is, if you haven't subscribed, please subscribe, hit that notification bell so that you're notified every single time we post something. Now it's time to move on to the cons, the disadvantages, the things that are ugly, the things that we don't like, the things that make you go, nah, this ain't for me. Number 1, the reputation it has for rejection and migration. Now, this has a lot to do with types of jewelry that have been used in the past. This has a lot to do with the fact that with some people, their brow is not pronounced enough, and we'll get to anatomy next, but anatomy has a big part in it. I think a lot of it comes down to improper jewelry. It was really popular for a while to put straight barbells in these. I do not understand the logic behind it, never did, never will, and it tended to kind of force the piercing to be outward and make it more of a surface-to-surface piercing. Thus, they tended to migrate and reject for that reason. With most cases, if this is done, or you wear rings or curved barbells, you're not going to have that issue. That's why I say it has a reputation for rejection or migration. However, it comes down to, and I'll get to this a little bit more, if you don't have the correct anatomy, this piercing possibly will reject. Number 2, anatomy. This piercing requires you, as I've already kind of alluded to in the first one, that you have the correct anatomy to support the piercing. The brows that are a little bit more meaty, a little bit more pronounced, a little bit more outward are going to heal with less problems and issues and be less likely for rejection or migration than those that are more flat to the face where it isn't as meaty. This is why I think this tends to be more of a male piercing, because we generally have thicker tissue there that is a little bit better at supporting this tissue. That's not always the case. We're all genetically different. Anatomies vary vastly from person to person, but having that correct anatomy is going to definitely improve your ability to heal this piercing and reduce that likelihood of rejection or migration. Now, I have done people that don't really have a lot of meat there that have never had any issues with it. But it's kind of a thing where, you need to discuss it with your piercer. They need to evaluate the area, and they need to decide whether or not this is a good idea for you or not. Number 3, the jewelry must stay in at all times. If you're in a situation where you have to remove it for work, if you have to remove it to compete in sports, cheer, drama, whatever you're doing, you can't do that. This piercing, once you remove the jewelry, tends to close pretty rapidly unless you've had it for a long, long period of time. So if you were in a situation where it's just not going to be acceptable to wear this all the time, this may not be the piercing for you. Number 4, this can affect employment. Though the nostril has become kind of socially acceptable in most service industry jobs and etc., this one still tends to be kind of on that cusp. Right up there with probably right between nostrils and septums and right, nostril septums, pretty acceptable because you can flip up the septums. But eyebrows are kind of right there between those two and oral piercings that are visible. It's really something you need to discuss with your employer before you get it done to make sure that it's okay. It can affect placement in jobs in the future. Even if you remove the jewelry, there's always going to be scar tissue. Now, if it rejects or migrates, there's going to be even more scar tissue. So you need to consider that and how it's going to affect your future. Hopefully, we just get to a point where everybody's pierced and there's no way that they can't hire you. But I don't foresee that happening anytime soon. And the last one, number 5, is limited to 2 styles of jewelry. I mentioned earlier that for a while everybody was like, oh, yeah, put straight barbells in it. Yeah, put straight barbells in it. No, it needs to be either a curved barbell or it needs to be a ring or circular piece of jewelry. There is a lot of different options in both of those types of jewelry. In fact, they're very popular. And in fact, there is a lot of different colors, materials, ends, connectors, etc. that you can put in here. But you are kind of stuck with those 2. You can't put straight barbells in, labret studs, and all kinds of other stuff. With the cons out of the way, let's talk a little bit about our merch store. If you like swag, you like T-shirts, you like to look pretty, and you like to express your or look cool, cool or pretty, I don't know, whatever you like to do with your clothing and accessories. Check out our merch store. There's a lot of different products there, a lot of different designs, and a lot of colors. Links are in the description. Also, there's one of those merch bars down below, so you can get kind of a sample of what some of those designs look like. Now, let's move on to things you should look for. First off, your piercer should, as always, be very professional, experienced, willing to educate you, open to answering questions, and make you feel comfortable. They should offer a consultation, and in that consultation, they should talk about what it's going to take to heal it. They should talk about any risks that are involved with getting the piercing done. They should discuss with you any allergic reactions you may have to materials, products, etc. And they should evaluate your anatomy and see if this piercing is going to work for you. They should also talk about jewelry choices. Like I mentioned earlier, you need something that's curved or circular to fit this area well and limit the possibility of rejection or migration. Just to reinforce it, they should suggest either a ring or a curved barbell. I have had a lot of luck over the years piercing with rings. I know that's going to make a lot of people clench their fists and hit that unsubscribe button and make a bunch of comments, but this piercing seems to do really well with them. I've had okay luck with curved barbells. The only problem with curved barbells is trying to figure out how much that person's going to swell and not getting something in there so long that it ends up causing more damage than a ring would. The diameter of the jewelry should match the piercing length, meaning that it should be as flat as possible, though a little bit of an arch on this one is not usually a bad idea. Like I said, they are prone to migration, so they are going to move a little bit, but for the most part, it should match it and be as flat as possible in there to give that piercing the shortest distance to heal. One thing you want to check out before getting a piercing done is, does your piercer supply Aftercare product? Do they sell it? If not, where can you get it? Do they give you written and oral instructions? If they don't give you oral instructions like we're not doing right now during the pandemic, do they offer a video that's going to tell you how to take care of it, etc.? It's good to have those things nailed down beforehand so that you're not running around with this just done piercing trying to get everything to heal that thing correctly. Okay, let's move on to the piercing experience itself. First off, they're going to make you, most places will make you fill out a waiver, or you filled out a waiver in advance online like we allow you to do. The waiver should cover basic stuff. It should release them to do the piercing, should certify that you're at least an adult or you have written consent from a legal guardian to be pierced. Things like they should talk to you about any, or it should ask questions, I should say. I don't know. Do waivers talk? Anyway, I'm sure it's coming. It's in the pipeline. Basically, should cover any allergic reactions you may have to any type of products they're using, and those should be listed. It should cover, of course, jewelry material. It should cover any medical conditions that you may have, any medication that you may be on, and any controlled or uncontrolled substances you may be on. This is kind of a questionnaire because what we're doing as piercers, we're trying to cover our bases and make sure that there's not going to be some reason that we shouldn't do this. Next, they're going to go ahead and disinfect the area. They're going to set up, disinfect the area, and then they're going to move on to marking. Now, when they mark the piercing, it's usually done at a 90-degree angle to the curvature of the area. Think your lobes or your your brow kind of is like, kind of shaped like that, meaning that's the end, like about like that. So what they're going to try to do is have that curvature be matched at kind of a 90-degree angle. Think of like a clock dial. We're trying to get one of those 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock things going on. Or 11 or noon. 11:30 maybe? I don't know. Anyway, it should match that. It should be at a 90-degree angle so that it crosses through that. It should match on length on both sides. Always look at the markings. They can be kind of confusing. They aren't exact every time. Sometimes they're pierced a little bit different, a little bit slightly, and it's more of a guide for the piercer. But you should always check them out before you get them done. Generally, I like to line up at least the first one. If you're doing multiples, that's fine. But the first one is usually lined up right with the corner of the eye. Now, usually this is done with forceps. It can be done freehand. I don't particularly like that method, but that's a whole other video in itself. And actually, I made that video at one point. Once it's clamped, the needle's injected in and through. Maybe a needle receiving tube is used, maybe cork, probably not, but that's possible. Then the forceps are removed. The jewelry is then inserted. Oftentimes, the part that takes the longest is closing the jewelry, and then there might be a little bit of slight bleeding, and you might notice a little bit of throbbing and aching immediately after the piercing. That usually fades in a short period of time, usually a couple minutes. This is not a very painful piercing to get done usually, and usually a few minutes afterwards you don't even notice it's there unless you bump it, as in the piercing will be sensitive to the touch. Another thing is this piercing can bruise sometimes if you use forceps and if you don't use forceps. Some people are a little bit more prone to it. Sometimes we hit blood vessels and it does that. Usually the bruising will fade usually within a few days, but if it's really bad or you got a black eye or what have you, if it doesn't start to recede, you should contact your piercer or medical professional. Now it's time to talk a little bit about healing. Like I said earlier, this can take anywhere, ideally, I would say 8 to 12 weeks. Some people will say much longer. So to be conservative, I'd say 12 to 16 weeks is probably a good conservative estimate. During that time, you need to clean it twice daily using sterile saline solution. I like Nelmed, piercing aftercare. Basically, it needs to be sterile saline in a can, 0.9% saline or sodium. Nothing else. No egg whites, no food preservatives, no chemical names that you've never heard of, no tea tree oil, no root beer, no sassafras, none of that. Nope, don't need it. Just saline. You must practice cross-contamination prevention. Things like washing your hands before you handle it, no oral contact or exchanging of bodily fluids on, near, around the piercing until it heals, keeping your environment clean, clothing, bedding, towels, anything that may have contact with it, not submerging the piercing in bodies of water you cannot control the quality of, which is everything but your own clean bathtub. So in other words, no swimming. Nope, can't swim. Can't swim till it's healed. Sorry. It's an open wound. Can't swim. Can't do it. Unless you want an infection. Now I'm going to do this with my head for a while. Keep pets away from it. Don't let them sleep in the bed with you. They're just germ magnets, especially if they're the kind that like to sleep up by your face and steal things from you in the night, like your soul. If your hair is long enough to touch the area, make sure that it is dry before it comes in contact with the piercing. Always do that. Dry it first, then let it fall. Avoid contact. Don't play with it. Leave it alone. Isolate it. Send it to the forbidden zone. And keep things away from it until it's completely healed. Even after it's healed, understand that it is a hard metal object inside soft tissue. If you're constantly pulling, yanking, playing, catching, etc., it's going to have problems. And it's one of the reasons why this piercing migrates long after it heals all of a sudden. Now, it's going to be normal for the first 3 to 5 days to see redness, discolorization, heat, tenderness to touch, inflammation, swelling, maybe even a little bit of slight bleeding off and on, and the bruising in a rare amount of people. Let's talk a little bit about jewelry. Jewelry should stay in at all times indefinitely. There is no reason to remove jewelry and leave it out to sleep in or sleep or whatever. Leave the jewelry in. Body piercing jewelry is designed to stay in the body for long periods of time. If you want to change the jewelry, take it out, put another piece in immediately afterwards. That way there's always jewelry in it. Jewelry should fit comfortably, not too tight. This is especially a factor with curved barbells. You want to make sure that they're a little bit on the loose side. Your body's organic. It expands and it contracts. And having something that's super tight in there is going to probably cause issues. With rings, you don't want to go to really small diameters because suddenly you're taking something that's kind of slightly curved and turning it into this really tight circle. And it's very restrictive. And it puts a lot of pressure on the piercing. And it squeezes. And that will cause piercing to suddenly reject. In most cases, switching to a curved barbell or wearing a curved barbell or curved barbell style jewelry is going to reduce the likelihood of rejection or migration. So I generally suggest, even if it was pierced with a ring initially, or you start to see any problems or it's suddenly sore, switching to a curved barbell to reduce the amount of pressure on the piercing and the amount of contact it gets. If you have jewelry, especially if it was if you have jewelry that's oversized, especially if it was pierced initially with a curved barbell, it is best to go to a smaller piece once it heals. Now let's talk about living with the piercing. Now it's time to say something I already said. Leave the jewelry in at all times. Don't remove it. This piercing can close pretty rapidly. It's always best when you have a piercing on your body, regardless of where it's at, to leave the jewelry in. It's designed to do that, and that's the one thing you can do to guarantee that this piercing does not close. One thing I forgot to mention a little bit earlier, which I should have, is if it's done with a ring or circular jewelry, often they will stick straight out right after they're done. Usually over a couple days or a couple weeks, they'll start to flatten to the side or flatten to the body. There is no problem with this. It's perfectly fine. It's your body's way of kind of finding the comfortable spot that it wants it to be in. And as I'm going to mention this again because I already mentioned it once, avoid trauma, pressure, touching, playing, anything that's going to cause trauma to the piercing even after it heals. All those things can cause a healed piercing to suddenly become damaged and start rejecting. Lastly, abandoning the piercing. Let's say you just got sick of it and you're done with it. You're done. You want to get out of it. So if you remove the jewelry, usually it will close or start to close in the center and then slowly fill up outward. If it's during the healing process, keep an eye on it just like you would any wound. Make sure that it doesn't become infected. Practice safety of keeping things away from it, just like if you had a cut on your forehead. Over time, at first there'll be 2 indentation scars. Sometimes there'll be maybe a little bit of a raised area where the piercing was. That should fade over time. Most people, when they're done, they're going to end up with 2 indentation scars, slowly fading over a long period of time. Last thing I need to talk about is sebums. I do this on every video, basically, because it comes up so often. If this white kind of cottage cheese looking, or not cottage cheese, cream cheese looking stuff, kind of waxy comes out of there, smells like, the inside of your navel after you haven't cleaned it for 4 days, that's sebums. It's a natural product to your body. It's oil. It tends to be waxy. It tends to collect in piercings. And then when you squeeze it, it comes out. It's gross. Healthy, no problem, not an infection. Don't worry about it. Well, that's all I have to say about this today. If you have any questions, comments, etc., please leave them down below in that comment section. That's what it's there for. Till next time, here's hoping all your piercings heal with ease and without a single issue. And if you're in the Des Moines, Iowa area, I hope to see you for your body piercing needs in the future, along with my apprentice, Shannon. I don't know who I'm pointing at. Well, have a good day, everybody. Thank you for watching. Take care, stay well, and we'll see you in the next video.